Hi everybody, it's January 18th, 2025, and this is today's episode of my video journal of my recovery from watching my little brother with Down syndrome, Paul Kierans, 64, be locked up in his group home by the British Columbia New Democratic Party for 588 days. Then he had some kind of brain incident and he died at Burnaby Hospital, or he was killed. I believe he was killed. His oxygen mask was removed as he was struggling to recover from a brain incident, and he was sedated to death. So I've been struggling with the identity. I live in Coquitlam in the province of British Columbia in Canada, and I've been struggling with my identity as a Canadian citizen. A couple of weeks, as soon as he got into power, Donald Trump said his first visit was with the malignant, narcissist, illegitimate current government leader in Canada, Justin Trudeau, whom I call Justin Castro. I mean, he's obviously the illegitimate son of Fidel Castro, the communist leader of Cuba, who didn't give up power for anybody or anything. But I'm struggling because the first thing that Trump said to him was he was going to annex Canada and make Justin the 51st governor, or the governor of the 51st state. And it just brought a tumult of revulsion, and it brought to mind, I think it was Sir Walter Scott that said, is there a man with soul so dead that never to himself has said, this is my home, my native land? And I was thinking about my ancestors, both of whom had the opportunity to settle in the United States, but then settled in Canada. So my grandfather, Tom Kierans, on my father's side, was an Irish citizen, and his father was a survivor of Angorta, the Great Hunger, the potato famine in 1847. My great-grandfather, William Kierans, was 10 years old, and he only spoke Irish. He didn't speak English. But my grandfather, Tom Kierans, and his three brothers emigrated to North America, and he landed in Vermont, and he worked as a logger in Vermont. He started off by working as a logger in the 1890s, and he eventually moved to Montreal, and he learned to speak flawless French, English, and Irish. And he was a supporter of Irish independence, and he used to travel into the United States to bring money for the Republican Army of Ireland. His best friend was Eamon de Valera, the first president of the Free Irish Republic. But he chose to move to Montreal. So two of the brothers of the four brothers that emigrated to North America, two settled in Canada and two settled in the United States. And the two that settled in Canada took the spelling of the name Kierans with an S, and the two that settled in the United States left the S off, so Kierans. So my grandfather, Tom Kierans, a brilliant man, he rose from sweeping the tracks for the Montreal Transit Commission to being the chairman of the board of the Montreal Transit Commission, and he was given the freedom of the city, which meant that he could park in the middle of the Champlain Bridge and nobody could do anything. He could park anywhere he wanted. A very quiet, authoritative man who died in 1947. I never met him. So that was my paternal grandfather, Tom Kierans. And then on my mother's side, they were the Mulligans. So my great-grandfather, Jim Mulligan, was Sir John A. Macdonald's law partner in the Toronto firm of MacDonald, Marsh and Mulligan. And he had all kinds of debt problems, and his career, he was a lawyer, but his career was up and down. So he traveled to the United States, and he was in Cincinnati. He lived in Cincinnati for some time. And then he moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And so he had 6 children, and they used to say about the 6 children, of which my grandfather was one, there was 2 Canucks, 2 Kentucks, and 2 Buckeyes. But he also settled in Sudbury. My great-grandfather, Jim Mulligan, who had been Sir John A. Macdonald's law partner, settled in Sudbury, and he was an Ontario Superior Court judge. And my grandfather was also, Murray Mulligan, was also an Ontario Superior Court judge. So both of my grandfathers had the opportunity to settle in the United States, but they chose Canada. Canada abolished slavery 72 years before the 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which took a civil war that killed almost 1 million people, 1 million of its people. The bloodiest war in American history was the American Civil War. And during the 72 years when Canada had abolished slavery, but the United States, that is the Pitt River right there. It's one of the greatest salmon rivers in the world. So Canada abolished slavery in the 1780s, and it took 72 years for the United States to enact the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery. And during that time, American slaves would look at the North Star as a symbol of freedom. And there was the Underground Railway, which was a trek or a pathway through the States to Canada, to freedom in Canada. And many of them settled in Nova Scotia. And Salt Spring Island in British Columbia was mostly settled by freed black slaves. So Canada represented a symbol of freedom. So although both Canada and the United States ultimately were an offshoot of the British United Kingdom, Canada adopted or abolished slavery almost a century before the United States did. So that's my country. Unfortunately, recently, Canada has, with the election on October 19th of 2015, I remember that night because it was the night my dog Inu died. Justin Trudeau came to power, and we didn't know it then, but his grand scheme, just like Hitler, was to kill people. You know, Stephen King, the novelist, said, murder is like potato chips. You can't stop with just one. And the ultimate power is killing people. So Justin Trudeau, as a symbol of progressiveness, made killing vulnerable, disabled, mostly impoverished, almost all impoverished people, eligible to be killed by the state. It's not assisted suicide. It's not suicide at all. It's a doctor or a nurse putting a needle in your arm and killing you. And I warned when I figured out what was going on. At first, it was only people who had a reasonably foreseeable death, people who were dying, that the Supreme Court of Canada gave permission to be killed. And then, of course, they expanded it, and now they want to be able to kill incapable children and adults. Canada has killed 60,000 citizens this way, mostly disabled and impoverished people, since I call him Justin Castro, took power. 5 out of every 100 deaths in Canada is now by lethal injection administered by a doctor or nurse. Canada kills 20 plus people a day this way. And to the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been one case where there's been an objection or an objection or a refusal to kill someone. Or there's been a court case about it. And the reason that is because once you're dead, you can't object. You can't not vote for Justin Castro any longer. So when I practiced divorce law I was a federal prosecutor for 3 years. Then I was a divorce lawyer for 16 years. And 50% of our divorce applications, first of all, it took a year to get a divorce. And 50% of our divorce applications were bumped as being irregular or not meeting the standard. How many applications to be killed are bumped? 0. Is there never a case when somebody's pressured into asking to be killed? Or when it's inappropriate? Never? 0? I doubt it. Or if somebody was given the opportunity to have resources other than a needle with a lethal injection. So I predicted back in 4 or 5 years ago, I had a YouTube channel, and I predicted that Canada's euthanasia program would lead to an attack on our sovereignty as a country. And I was exactly right, because literally that was the first thing out of Donald Trump's mouth, was annexing Canada as the 51st state. And when when it comes down to a soldier who's asked to cross the border into Canada, or a bureaucrat who's asked to move into Canada, take over, they're going to be told, well, they kill their most innocent and vulnerable people. They're disabled. They can't even protect their innocent and vulnerable people. And the people that live there traded getting a better dental program for the murder of the most innocent and vulnerable people. Thanks, Jagmeet Singh. Disgrace to the human race. Get in your Maserati and drive off into the sunset. So those are my thoughts. As I was waiting at the bus stop, a Ford F-150 truck drove by with a Canadian flag flying from the truck bed. And the sun was shining through the Canadian flag, and it was waving in the wind on this beautiful day. And it was so inspiring. Where my grandparents was my grandfather, Tom Kierans, and my other grandfather, Jim Mulligan. Were they right to stay in Canada? Did they make the right decision? Do we have a national identity? Unlike what Justin Castro has pronounced. We have to, I've asked Pierre Poilievre directly. I wrote him, he's the only politician that ever wrote me back. And I said, what's your position on medical assistance in dying? And he said, I'm not going to change it. I'm not going to change a thing. Once governments get power, they never give it up voluntarily. And do we have to have a civil war like the United States had to have a civil war, killing almost 1 million people, to change an evil practice, an evil government practice like euthanasia? I don't think so. Canada's motto, or the objective for the Canadian government, is peace, order, and good government. That's called POG. Anyways, I'm coming to my stop. That's it for today. We have to get rid of this euthanasia and get back to our basic conservative principles. Take care, everybody.